Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Andrea and I have been selling on Etsy for almost 8 years, which is crazy to say. And this channel is where I share everything I've learned in the past and everything I'm currently learning and just kind of all the things about Etsy. So if that's you, you are in the right place. Today specifically, we are going to be talking about, or I guess answering the question, can anyone sell on Etsy? So that is what we're talking about today. We're going to break down kind of the full answer to that question. What is allowed on Etsy? What isn't allowed on Etsy? All the things. That is what we are diving into today. So first things first, when we talk about who can sell on Etsy, can anyone sell on Etsy, it's less about who you are and more about what you will be selling. So really the only question to be answered about who you are, like specifically, you might not be eligible to sell on Etsy based on which country you're in. And I will link a article from Etsy in the description. If you're wondering like, okay, I live here and I don't know if like my country is eligible to sell on Etsy, that will be linked in the description. That's really the only reason why I could think of someone who's like wouldn't be able to based on where you live. Obviously that is a total bummer. I am in the United States and so we are able to sell on Etsy, but there will be a link in the description that is from Etsy that I believe they probably keep it updated based on your country if you can sell on Etsy or not. So that's the only real parameter I can think of that's actually more who you are versus what you sell. So this video is going to be more about what you sell, what items are allowed on Etsy, and less about who specifically is allowed to sell on Etsy. I hope that makes sense, but if you are wondering about your country, I will link that in the description below. That being said, let's move right into what items are allowed on Etsy. So Etsy has curated a marketplace around small business and around unique items. And so it's not like everything can be sold on Etsy. Not even every small business owner can sell on Etsy. So there's basically two broad categories of items that are allowed to be sold on Etsy. And then everything else is kind of, you can't sell it on Etsy. So we're gonna break down those two broad categories and they are handmade or vintage items. Okay, so let's first answer the question, what constitutes an item as handmade? So it's a little more broad than you might be thinking because it's not just like, okay, I crocheted this scarf, I can sell it on Etsy. It's a little bit more broad than that, but there still needs to be a handmade element. So if you are selling in the handmade category, you wanna sell handmade items on Etsy, the item either needs to be made by you, like you need to make the item, or it needs to be an original design by you. So that means that you can have someone else make it, but you need to design it. So basically, when I say handmade, I mean that you can't just buy stuff from Alibaba and sell it on Etsy. So that would not be allowed, even though that would be considered a small business, and maybe you have like a really good business or you're like a boutique buyer and you're like curating your shop, that would need to happen on another platform because that is not allowed on Etsy. So the other parameter is that you or a team member in your shop needs to physically make or create the original design for your item. Obviously, the difference between what I just said there and the last item is that it can be a member of your team. And so if you are the owner and you have someone who does customer service and someone who handles all of your designs, but then you have those designs printed on a t-shirt by someone else, you can make that work. So that is considered a handmade item because a member of your shop designed it and someone else helped you make it. So I feel like this is best explained in examples. So if you have something like our business, everything in our shop is not handmade. We buy sweatshirts and then add a monogram to it. So there's a handmade element and we are designing it in that way. There's obviously all kinds of ways that you can sell on Etsy under the handmade category. If you're crocheting a scarf, absolutely, that's totally fine. If you're sewing a dress, that's amazing. All of those things. But then there's also the people who design stickers and design t-shirts and have them completely outsourced by someone else, but it's still considered handmade because you are creating the original design for it and it is your work, and it is that way they can keep their marketplace around supporting artists and supporting small business owners because that is what you are selling. I'm hoping that this is making a lot of sense, just because it is one of those things where it's like, what really is handmade? And just really it needs to be, what it comes down to is either you need to literally make it or have the original design for it and have someone else help you make it, and then that constitutes as handmade. That being said, if you are selling in the handmade category, there are a few things that you really need to know just so that you do not get your shop like flagged or anything like that. There are a couple things that you need to know. So first thing you need to know is the photos have to be your original photos. You cannot steal someone else's photos. The photos that you use in your description, or the photos that you use in your listing, need to be your original photos for it to be allowed on Etsy. That's a rule that they have. The second thing you need to know is that you have to list production partners if you have them. So a production partner is someone who helps you make those original designs. So if you are, I'll just use our shop as an example, we had help making our keychains. We do not make keychains. Though a member of our shop designed the keychains, we had help actually getting them made into keychains. So it still falls under the handmade category. However, we have to list that factory on our listing as a production partner. And this is really easy to do. So you can just do that right in your listing. It's not hard to add a production partner, but you need to make sure that you are doing that so that customers can know more about your items. And that's just a rule on Etsy, that if you have help from another business helping you create your original designs, you need to list them as a production partner on your listing. The last thing you need to know before we dive into vintage, the vintage parameters, the last thing you need to know about handmade is that anyone who is helping you in this process needs to be listed as a team member on your site. There will be a video posted on this channel about how to fill out your about section, and so that I'm going to cover team members in that video, so subscribe if you want to see that. But basically, anyone who helps you in the design process needs to be listed as a team member on your shop. Now we are going to move into what constitutes an item as a vintage item. So like I mentioned earlier, Etsy allows handmade, and I feel like that is the bulk of what they do. Like that's the bulk of their sellers is handmade, but there are also a lot of vintage sellers. So we are going to now move into what constitutes an item as vintage. So the parameters for vintage are much more easy, I guess, to explain to you. Basically, for an item to be considered vintage and be sold on Etsy's platform, the actual item must be over 20 years old. So that means that anything, I guess the real parameter here is that anything that is vintage inspired but is made like now cannot be sold on Etsy. So you have to have an item that is literally over 20 years old, a real vintage piece, and then you can sell it under the vintage category. I think that this would be so fun. I don't know if you guys follow me on Instagram at all. You know that I'm super into all things mid-century. I have been for several years. It's our whole house. And so I think that this would be so fun. I think in another world, I'd be a vintage seller on Etsy, but that's not the point. Anyways, that is what constitutes vintage on Etsy. An item must be over 20 years old, and it must literally be that old. You can't just get something that is like vintage inspired, doesn't count. It has to be actually 20 years old. There is one more category on Etsy, which I feel like isn't talked about very often, but it is allowed on Etsy, and that is craft supplies. They do not have to be handmade. They do not have to be vintage, but their primary purpose needs to be to create something else with them. I hope that makes sense. So the primary purpose of craft supplies is that they are a tool or a supply to build something more. So I don't know how to explain that better, but that is another category of items that are allowed to be sold on Etsy is craft supplies, and party supplies falls under this category. Etsy makes sure to note that in their on their webpage that explains all this. And so party supplies falls under the craft supplies category. So if your Etsy shop or your Etsy shop idea falls under any of those three categories, you are good to go. I do really quickly want to discuss some things that are very much not allowed on Etsy. I think there's a huge kind of, I don't really know how to explain this, but a lot of sellers are complaining about items getting flagged as not allowed on Etsy and their shops are getting shut down, which is really, really bad. And I hate that that's a thing. However, there are some very clear cut, like this is not allowed on Etsy, don't even try it type of things. And so I just want to talk about that really quickly. So things that are not allowed on Etsy other than like danger and like prohibited items, like there are certain things that you just can't sell because they're dangerous on Etsy or like that kind of stuff. But the biggest ones that people definitely struggle with and get flagged for are copyrighted items. And so you're definitely going to want to check on literally anything. Like there's so many copyrights in the world. My shop has been flagged twice for using like keywords that we didn't know were copyrighted. So like the word onesie is copyrighted. So things like that. I think that there's someone who copyrighted or patented or trademarked, I don't really know what the verbiage is, but they did that to the term boy mom. And so that is no longer allowed. You're not allowed to sell things that say boy mom on them, all sorts of things like that. You're going to want to be very, very careful with what you sell on Etsy as far as making sure it's not copyrighted. So if you are at all in the, in the realm of concern that your stuff might be copyrighted or even just a piece of it. If you're a sewer and your fabric has licensed materials, you cannot sell them on Etsy. So, I mean, legally you can't sell them at all, but you definitely can't sell them on Etsy. Your listing will get taken down. So you definitely want to be really, really careful that you are not selling or trying to sell a copyrighted item on Etsy. And that is the main thing. So the only other time that you really see people getting shut down is when they're selling things that just are flat out not allowed on Etsy. Like they're just buying and selling stuff from Alibaba, and that is obviously not allowed because we just went through the whole parameters of what is and isn't allowed on Etsy. So you're definitely going to want to make sure that you are watching that copyright thing really close. We just had a listing the other day that I thought would be really fun to list, and I checked the US database for like trademarks, and it was trademarked. Actually, I think it was trademarked in the UK. I don't really know. I don't know how all that works, but it was trademarked, and so we decided not to do it. But you're gonna wanna be really, really careful that you do not have a copyright on your listing because it likely will get taken down. And I've heard before that it's 3 copyright strikes and you're out. I don't know if that's true or not, but basically you're gonna wanna be careful with copyrighted stuff. Okay, so that about sums up everything that is allowed on Etsy, is not allowed on Etsy. And if you are questioning whether your country is eligible, like I said, that is linked in the description below. I really, really hope that this video was helpful and thoroughly answers your question. Can anyone sell on Etsy? Etsy is what we talk about every single week around here. I post 2 videos a week. And so if that is something that you are interested in learning more about, please do subscribe. I find this channel to be such a fun space to just meet other sellers and chat with y'all and share about what I've learned and what I'm currently learning and all of those sorts of things. So if that is what you are interested in, please do subscribe. There will be a link in the description for my free Etsy masterclass. It is an hour long of learning my 3-step framework all about how to get consistent sales on Etsy. So check that out if you are interested. And thank you so much for watching.